From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. And ahead today, during his weekly grain market segment, K-State's Dan O'Brien will talk about an unconventional pattern he's seeing in corn price basis in Kansas as the overall national corn harvest output remains uncertain. Also today, K-State's Lucas Haag reports on his ongoing research of alternative crops for High Plains growing conditions, including his first year of work with industrial hemp as a cropping option for the region. Later, Kansas FFA state reporter J.W. Wells reports from the third day of the 2019 National FFA Convention and awaiting to talk Kansas agricultural weather with us, K-State's Mary Knapp. All that coming up on Agriculture Today.
What is radon? Home exposure to radon gas is the leading cause of lung cancer death in the United States for non-smokers. In Kansas, 1 in 4 homes will test at or above the EPA action level. The Surgeon General recommends all homes be tested and fixed if necessary. Visit kansasradonprogram.org for more information. Test, fix, save a life. This message brought to you by the Kansas Radon Program, the Kansas Association of Broadcasters, and this station.
Thanks for listening in to another Agriculture Today on the K-State Radio Network. And the grain market observations for the week are front and center right here as we speak once more with Dan O'Brien, grain market economist, K-State Research and Extension. Dan, by the way, fresh off his presentation on the grain market outlook at the K-State edition of the 4-state crop insurance workshops. That was held yesterday in Salina, Dan, and you were sharing discussions with producers and crop insurance agents there about what's going on in the trades, but it's the same theme, it seems, that we've been churning about for some time now, the uncertainties about the new crop out there.
Well, yes, here we are in harvest, and we are watching struggles in harvest progress occurring up in the Dakotas, the northern states, also listening for reports from the eastern states, areas that were most delayed in their planting, to see what their results are. All of this, of course, aiming for the November 8th USDA crop production and World Ag Supply Demand Estimates report. I think it's good to keep in mind that that report on November 8th is going to be gauging the status of the crop on November the 1st, today. Right. And the most recent information we have is that about crop progress, again, based on a release on October 28th of where harvest was for corn and soybeans, particularly for corn, had some real issues still being dealt with. You just run down the roster. For the top 18 states, we're about 20% behind for harvest. That's, we have some doing great, others doing slower. 41% harvested as of October 27th, normally 61%. And when you go state by state, you see Illinois at 54% harvested, usually at 80. Indiana, 48% harvested, usually 66. Iowa, 26%, normally 53. Then you start heading up into those northern states, the ones that you most wonder about. Michigan, 21% harvested, normally 39. Minnesota, 22, normally 56. You look at, even Nebraska, just to the north of us here, 44%, normally 50, so that's not as far behind. North Dakota, 6% harvested, 41% in normal. South Dakota, 14%, normally 46. Wisconsin, 13, normally 37. So perhaps we're just too far out in the field to not just say, well, gosh, it'll all happen, because we see harvest problems in our own backyard. Here in Kansas, by the latest numbers for us, we're doing pretty good, 74% harvested versus 82. In western parts of the state, we've had some wind damage, some fallen ears, some real issues. Our grain sorghum harvest is supposedly pretty well up to speed, but there's been some damage even with that crop from the winds and excessive moisture this year, causing problems with stalks. So you bring all those together for the corn crop, and heading into that November report, there's sure some questions about what final yields will be. Again, the USDA had plugged in 168.4 as the number they were projecting. Again, there were some acreage adjustments and all that happened at that time. That coming out of the October 10th report. Here on November 8th, you could have that same number, but there's likelihood, depending on what the USDA finds when they're out in the field, of some downward adjustment. Is it 166, 163, or even less? Hard to say, but if you take the harvested acres that the USDA had projected in October, and again, even that is somewhat at risk in some of these worst, most soggy areas, then you'd be looking at instead of a 13.8 billion bushel crop, it could go anywhere from 12.9 to 13.3. Those type of changes would bring about you're talking about 500, 600, 700 million bushels, and you sharply change the bottom line of the balance sheet in terms of ending stocks and stocks to use. Now, the market is very aware of those issues. I think that the corn market has been discouraged some by questions about usage, particularly slower export numbers, slower than had been hoped for, worries about ethanol production. And by the way, we've figured ethanol profitability, and whereas the last several months in a row, June, July, August, et cetera, we were looking at losses of 15 to 20, 25 cents. Here for October, with ethanol moving higher and corn prices moderating, ethanol plants were only showing a 3-cent loss, which is a victory compared to the 15 to 25 they were showing before. So some move towards stability there in that industry. But anyway, going on, if you look at supplies moving lower, then you look back to historic relationships and see what type of impact you have on the corn market. So I think the market is waiting for hard numbers, and that November 8th report will be an opportunity to see what the USDA has, and we'll go on from there. If production moves lower by 400, 500, 600 million bushels, ending stocks after some rationing move down about half of that. If you make that assumption, then instead of 13 or 14% stocks used for corn, you're something along the lines of 11.4 to 12.7, and looking at 10 to 25 or more cents adjustment in the price you'd expect to see given tighter stocks. That puts U.S. grain producers who are staring at commercial storage charges in elevators in a real quandary. They hear analysts such as ourselves out of K-State talking about the possibility of these adjustments coming, but yet prices are at they're representing basically harvest time basis. Do they wait and store grain on into November, December, and even on into January, waiting for something to possibly happen? That's kind of an at-risk outcome. That's the situation we find ourselves in this year.
Well, you mentioned their basis, and in this absence of certainty, to put it that way, you've been keying in on corn basis in Kansas from west to east, and you're finding some atypical patterns there, you say?
Yeah. Normally we look to southwest Kansas, to western Kansas, as particularly southwest, as an area of strong basis for corn, and again, it's a demand center. You have both some ethanol plants down there, especially cattle feeding. So again, strong basis area. You see at Garden City, basis of 3 cents to 7 cents under on yesterday's closes, reported by the USDA. Protection, about 17 under. Sublet, 2 cents over. Ulysses, 2 cents over. Syracuse, 3 cents under. So those are all pretty good basis bids. When you look into eastern Kansas, at times when we have plentiful supplies and especially during harvest, you may tend to see wider basis levels than what you're seeing right now. And Atchison, 8 cents under. Topeka, 15 under for the USDA reported bid. Wellington, 17 under. Art City, 19 under. Hutchinson running 25 to 15. So we are at harvest time, but some of the central eastern Kansas basis bids aren't just cratering in terms of the basis relative to these futures. So something sure interesting to watch.
And therefore, as you were saying earlier, whether to store, whether to sell, if folks have gotten that crop out, well, that's just not cut and dried, is it? And therefore, producers should somehow position themselves as best they can to be ready for whatever happens.
I think the key issue in a lot of elevators will be, again, how long can you store before you start getting charged storage? Is it 2 weeks? Is it a month? No doubt for absentee landowners who are very sensitive to taking on additional costs, those kinds of decisions will be upon them. Again, this November 8th report for corn will have a lot to do, at least in the foreseeable future, with bringing some hard production numbers to the market and then a readjustment of supply-demand balance sheets, and then we see where we go from there.
And Dan, before we let you go, we haven't talked much about soybeans yet. Basis isn't very good, as you note. So what should producers be thinking about with respect to that market?
Still the possibility of lower yields coming in the most recent supply-demand estimates for soybeans, about 3.55 billion bushel crop. If we end up with something less than that, the USDA shaves off 1 or 2 bushels per acre, which they could with the harvest problems we've seen, particularly in the northern states, then you could see adjustments of 50, 100 million bushels off of that, and some tightening up yet, even more of ending stocks to use. The USDA projected $9 per bushel as the U.S. average price for this marketing year in that October report. With some of these mitigating adjustments, you could sure see anywhere from a 10 to 30 cent increase in that projected price as stocks to use tighten up below the 11.4% they projected, more like a 8.8 to 10.7. So if there's a leaning that I've got, it's that just waiting for the harvest numbers to come in and some resolution of these lingering, ongoing questions that we see right in front of us on the TV screen and on social media with regard to harvest problems that corn and soybeans have, and again, where will the USDA production numbers go, and how will the markets react to that? To those hard number realities once we move through these various USDA supply-demand reports that are right in front of us.
And once more, as you say, market watchers will be prepping for the latest round of numbers in the form of the USDA's November WASDE report a week from today. And we'll have a last-minute preview of that when we talk again next Friday, Dan. Many thanks to you, as always.
Thanks, Eric. Take care.
Weekly grain market commentary from Dan O'Brien, grain market economist, K-State Research and Extension, right here every Friday on Agriculture Today.
Hamburgers, roast, ribs, steak, or whatever you prefer. Beef, it's what's for dinner. Kansas cattle farmers produce 7.5 million head of cattle per year. It takes about 7 tablespoons of peanut butter to get the same amount of protein in 1 serving of lean beef. Support your local Kansas farmers and ranchers. Eat beef. This message was brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
Welcome back. You're listening to Agriculture Today. Mike side with us from Northwest Kansas is the area agronomist for K-State Research and Extension based in that part of the state, Lucas Haag. Lucas has his hand in a number of research trials concerning alternative crops and how those are appearing as potential rotational crops for producers in the High Plains region. The one that captures a lion's share of attention, and it seems to be the flashiest of the bunch here, industrial hemp, Lucas. And from your perspective, what is the interest out there among producers?
Sure, Eric. So we did have some producers that attempted to grow hemp here in the 2019 crop year. We actually had some seed production. We had growers, I know some in Sherman County and as well as some other counties out throughout northwest Kansas. So, yeah, so there's interest there. I think we got a lot of guys that are really watching this closely, and I think that's appropriate to be keeping a close eye on how this develops. So we're certainly have a lot to learn. I think there's a very steep learning curve this first year for everyone involved, but I think the other side of that is we've got some confidence in knowing some things that we probably need to do differently for the 2020 year.
Now, to remind, hemp is being allowed in Kansas, industrial hemp, on a trial basis, licensed through the state for, if you will, experimental purposes. But as it's looking so far, agronomically speaking, what's the performance potential of this, and where can it really fit into a rotation?
Yes, that's exactly kind of, at least the trials I'm running, what we're trying to figure out is what are the agronomic implications, what does that production system look like. There's a lot of rhetoric out there about, it grows anywhere, doesn't need water, doesn't need fertilizer, and so we're trying to sort some of that out and figure out how do we best manage it in our environment. Certainly as we move this crop further west, if we look at where hemp grows natively, it tends to be in wetter type environments and production areas of the world and in North America that have been growing it tend to be quite a bit different climate than western Kansas. And so that's one of actually the key components we got is, and I should clarify, at least at Colby, our focus has really been looking at the hemp grain production, fiber production, and dual purpose types. We're not delving into the CBD piece of it at this point in time, or at least the planning of clones, the space planning. We're not getting involved in that system yet. So one of the big things we're looking at is the response to water. So we've got trials this year that were done under varying levels of irrigation. So we had dry land, fully irrigated, and then 50% of fully irrigated, where we looked at a number of these hemp varieties.
So what are you finding out in the water response respect here? Is it able to, industrial hemp, perform decently when water is semi-limited?
Yeah, so we literally have those samples in the dryers right now, and so we're still working through the numbers on that. Just visually, we did get a response to irrigation. Probably not as big. Just visually, that response wasn't as maybe large as I had anticipated it might be. But going back to that, we've got a lot of challenges to work through in terms of actually getting the crop established, and I think that's where our biggest agronomic challenges are going to be. It's a seedling that does not, at least from what I saw this year, does not have a lot of vigor. We've got a lot of issues with seed quality, and that was also a lot of our producers in the state experienced that as well. Seed quality is a huge issue this year. It's a seed that's very easily damaged. The seed coat's very easily damaged, and so we can very quickly lose germination percentage or have it or be in a situation where the seedlings don't have the vigor they need to really compete. So getting a stand was our biggest challenge. That also has weed control implications. We've got to seed it really shallow, and a crust can be difficult for it to come through, and so that whole stand establishment thing, I think a lot about canola is a crop that we've had to learn a lot about. How do we get a good stand? And I think we're very much in a similar position with hemp.
Crop residue an obstacle here in that respect then?
It's very much a dual-edged sword in that we need that residue to prevent the soil from crusting and to help us from a weed control standpoint, but it also makes that seeding environment more challenging. So I think there's some opportunities there to look at maybe using row cleaners on drills, something to just barely move that residue aside to where we can put that hemp seed in there, but yet retain the residue on the surface to prevent crusting and help suppress weeds.
Still learning on the go here, and it's in the early going, but as you're looking at it, what could it substitute for in our common rotation, say wheat, sorghum, fallow in the High Plains region, which is extremely common? Where would it possibly fit in, do you think?
Yeah, and I really want to caution my comments, Eric. We're only 1 year into this, but my gut feeling today is I really I have a lot of concerns about moving this into a dry land system, and getting that stand is going to be one of those things, because we're talking about planting this really shallow. I can tell you for sure this year at Colby, had we not had our plots under sprinkler and had the ability to water those up, I don't think we'd have a stand. And so I think, and it's purported that it's going to be a high value crop, and so I really think irrigated acres is where this is going to be. This is where this water response data is going to be really important, because maybe we find out that maybe it's a crop that doesn't respond as strongly to water as, say, corn does. Well, then that opens up some opportunities to use it in a limited irrigation framework. Maybe we put it in that situation, give it just enough water to make sure we get a stand, hit it at some critical growth timings, but we don't try and utilize it as a fully irrigated crop.
Well, again, just getting out of the gate and learning more about where industrial hemp can fit into our crop production systems here in the state of Kansas. Anxious for more information as it comes forward. But we don't want to let industrial hemp overshadow other alternative crop work that you've been engaged in out in the Northwest area. Field peas, we've visited about that alternative before. What's the latest on that crop, Lucas?
Yeah, so 2019 was a tough year for springfield peas. We were so wet this spring. Acres were down significantly just because we simply, producers couldn't get in the field to get those acres established. But we are continuing that work in that area. We actually had 6 variety trials spread across the state this year, as far east as Belleville, and then west out to Colby and locations in between. Yields were good this year despite the late planting. We had a cool spring, which, putting that heat off really helped us finish that crop strong. So we had really strong yields out of that. The other thing coming along with that that's been interesting is, winter peas have sometimes been used in cover crop mixes here. We've had a lot of challenges with winter survival, but we really have kind of a next generation of winter pea genetics coming out. This is the second year in a row we've evaluated them in Northwest Kansas, and winter survival so far has been excellent, and yields have been significantly higher yielding than our spring peas. And so we continue to look at these newer genetics. Part of this is, industry, with the interest in plant-based protein, demand for peas specifically is really increasing. There's new protein processing facilities going in the northern Great Plains. It's really interesting. We're seeing the market expand at the same time. I feel like we're getting a better feel for what can we do with these crops here in Kansas.
So the market is coming along there, but once again, back to the agronomic value of field peas. When you think about breaking up pest cycles and the like, what is in fact the payoff there?
Yeah, and so and conversely, I think hemp is initially going to be a better fit under irrigation. These peas are a much better fit under dryland situations because they don't respond that well to irrigation water. So unless we're in a seed production scenario, irrigating them probably doesn't make a lot of sense. And so for us, yeah, exactly, breaking that pest cycle, because even if we think about our traditional dryland rotations, wheat, corn fallow, wheat, sorghum fallow, it's all grasses. And so this is our opportunity to get a broadleaf in a rotation, break that pest cycle, add some diversity to the rotation. So there's a lot of positive aspects there. From an economic standpoint, again, the cost of doing fallow is significant and really negatively impacts the profitability of that wheat crop. But if we can go in and use peas as a fallow replacement there, it gives us some other economic opportunities.
And one more crop we want to mention here, pinto beans. Where those fit and what purpose those might serve in the agronomic sense.
Yeah, so a lot of folks might not be aware that Kansas does have a dry edible bean industry in the northwest part of the state, and so we're doing some work in collaboration with some producers there in Sherman County, and there's a producer-owned 21st Century Bean Co-op owned by producers there in northwest Kansas, so we're collaborating with them. We've seen a really big change. Traditionally, dry edible beans grown were all vine types. That required a knifing operation, perhaps a windrowing operation, and then use of a pickup header or an actual bean combine then to harvest. Well, there's a lot of economic costs associated with each of those trips, and so the industry has moved more towards an upright bush-type bean, but yet all of our recommendations are based on the old type varieties. So we get a lot of questions from producers about row spacing, seeding rate, as we move to these newer upright-type beans, white mold, other disease pressure, how does that interact with row spacing? So Jeannie Falk-Jones, who's the agronomist there in Sherman, Cheyenne, and Wallace, myself, and the folks at 21st Century Bean. This is our first-year project where we put out 4 different varieties, 3 different seeding rates, 2 row spacings to really take a whole new, fresh look at how do we best manage dry edible beans in northwest Kansas. And so guys are looking for alternatives. The more attractive we can make an upright bean production system, that really appeals to folks because they can get into that crop with the existing equipment they have on hand.
Well, Lucas, you and colleagues continue to collect a wealth of information on these alternative field crop types. Keep up the great work. Always a pleasure to visit. Lucas Haag, K-State Research and Extension, the area crop production specialist for Northwest Kansas, sharing some of the work that he's involved with on alternative crops for Kansas rotational systems. You're listening to Agriculture Today. More shortly on the K-State Radio Network. For 25 years, K-State Research and Extension's Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services has been providing a no-cost, confidential place to call in and visit with an agricultural lawyer. Our experts are available to help you producers handle legal and financial issues. Explore your options and generate solutions. Call us at 800-321-3276 or visit us online. Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services. Agriculture Today continues now on the K-State Radio Network. Eric Atkinson with you. Once more, we hear about what's happening at the 92nd National FFA Convention taking place in Indianapolis. And good enough, once again, to supply us a report from the convention is J.W. Wells, Kansas FFA state reporter. Well, J.W., it was an active day yesterday in that several Kansas individuals were recognized in various areas. Let's begin with those Proficiency Award winner finalists. Several Kansans in the running.
Yes, Eric. Yesterday, it was announced that there were 3 finalists from the Riverton, that happened to be from the Riverton FFA chapter. Cade Riggin is a finalist in the Ag Services Proficiency area. Tyler Larison is a finalist in turf management proficiency, and Cole Riggin is a finalist for American Star Farmer Ag Placement.
Which is really remarkable for one chapter to have 3 proficiency finalists. That's very, very rare, JW.
Yes, and I happen to serve with Riverton, is also from the Southeast District, and I gotten to know the advisor from Riverton, Mr. Larison, as well as these individuals, and they truly deserve this honor. I have seen their passion about their SAEs and truly how they do live to serve, Eric.
Well, we wish the 3 of them all the best as they seek to land the National Proficiency Award in those given areas. And again, Cole Riggin vying for American Star Farmer in agricultural placement. Briefly here, tell us about his achievements that have led him this far.
Yes, his SAE, to my knowledge, was custom harvesting. He travels all across Kansas with his family, I believe, to harvest crops all across Kansas, and I believe the Midwest. He has gone truly far with his SAE, and after a brief conversation with him yesterday, he is very confident in how he handled the interviews, but he is still excited to see the overall outcome.
So we specifically wish Cole the best as he strives for that American Star Farmer recognition. And there were FFA chapters that were designated as finalists in the Premier Chapter recognition as well.
Yes. The Ark City FFA chapter and the Udall FFA chapter were recognized as finalists for Premier Chapter. They were recognized on stage. Their activities were broadcast to over 60,000 national FFA members. So they still were recognized as finalists. However, they were not selected as premier chapters. But their hard work still paid off in the fact that their hard work was recognized and that their activities were shared to thousands.
So congratulations to the Arkansas City and the Udall FFA chapters. Ironically, both of them in one general location, Cowley County in south central Kansas. Today's agenda, what's on the slate here? There are honorary American FFA degrees to be bestowed upon some Kansans. What's the story there?
Yes. From Kansas this year, there are 2 honorary American degree recipients. That would be Greg Krissick, representing Kansas Corn, and Jeff Gillespie from Anderson County High School. Both of these individuals have rendered high service to Kansas FFA as well as the National FFA organization. Eric, these are 2 very distinguished and 2 very well-deserving individuals that deserve the honorary American FFA degree.
So our congratulations to Greg and Jeff as well for one of the really prestigious recognitions and one can have as a supporter of the FFA program. And we are still waiting to hear the fate of the National FFA officer candidate from Kansas, Garrett Craig. Later today, it should be known whether he's made the final cut for the vote from the delegates on the national office, should we not?
Yes. Today, during the 4th General Session, should announce the finalist slate for the national officer candidate. I spoke to Garrett very briefly yesterday. He is still in high energy. He still has high hopes for what is to come.
And then, of course, the national officers will be announced tomorrow during the closing session of the National Convention. And we do want to recognize here that there are several Kansans involved in important activities at convention in the National FFA Band, Chorus, and Talent Contest.
Yes, Kansas is proud to have 5 FFA members in National Band, Chorus, and Talent. In the area of band, Katina Bartle from the Holton FFA chapter is in the band. Tyler Corson from the Mission Valley FFA chapter, Daisy Hawkins from the Atwood FFA chapter, and Lucas Kuchar from the South Haven FFA chapter are all 3 in the chorus. And competing for the FFA talent is Briley Ish from the Burlington FFA chapter. I heard yesterday in General Sessions, we all heard the band and the chorus. Very highly talented group of individuals, Eric. In fact, I would even say that these are the most qualified FFA members in all of the nation for the National Band and Choir, and even talent.
And they play an important role in the overall fabric of the convention, that's for sure. Congratulations to each of those young people for their specific roles there. JW, we're looking forward to what's coming, including what's decided on the national officer front, as will be announced during that session tomorrow. And our plan is to have you here, Mike's side, back here in Manhattan with us on Monday for a complete recap. Until then, many thanks, and enjoy the remainder of the convention.
Well, thank you for having me on, Eric.
J.W. Wells, state FFA reporter for the Kansas FFA. And again, the latest from the 92nd National FFA Convention, ongoing in Indianapolis. And now, this week's Kansas Wheat Scoop. Here's Marcia Boswell.
As a key part of its commitment to transparency and trade service, U.S. Wheat Associates produces an annual crop quality report that includes grade, flour, and baking data for all 6 U.S. wheat classes. The report compiles comprehensive data from analysis of hundreds of samples conducted during and after harvest by partner organizations and laboratories. It also provides essential, objective information to help buyers get the wheat they need at the best value possible. The 2019 U.S. Wheat Crop Quality Report is now available for download in English, Spanish, French, and Italian, and will be available in Chinese and Arabic soon. U.S. Wheat Associates also shares more detailed regional reports for all 6 U.S. wheat classes on its website. U.S. Wheat's annual crop quality seminars are now underway and will continue through the next month around the world. U.S. Wheat invites its overseas customers, including buyers, millers, and processors, to these seminars led by U.S. Wheat staff, U.S. Wheat farmers, State Wheat Commission staff, and educational partner organizations. In 2019, U.S. Wheat Associates is projected to host 43 seminars in 41 countries, including official seminars in the South American region for the first time in several years. For Kansas Wheat, I'm Marcia Boswell.
Thanks, Marcia, and you're listening to Agriculture Today.
Have you ever thought about where your food comes from? If you're thinking the grocery store, think again. Facts show that the American farmer feeds more than 129 people.
They are continually increasing and improving their operations. A wide variety of crops and livestock are grown in Kansas as well as the United States, providing food to your dinner plate.
Next time you see a farmer or rancher, thank them. For more information, contact K-State Research and Extension.
Agriculture Today concludes, as we always do at week's end, on Kansas agricultural weather. And with the latest information from the Weather Data Library at K-State, it's climatologist Mary Knapp, K-State Research and Extension. And fresh in hand, the numbers for the month of October, now that we're into November, Mary, and a month of contrast from beginning to end, most assuredly, in regard to temperature.
Right. Temperature is really kind of the high note, if you will. We started the month, all of the divisions were in the 90s. The warmest day of the month was the first day of the month, but we saw 98, 97 at most of the western divisions. Move into the middle 90s in the central part, and then 91 and 92 in the eastern third. So, again, quite warm.
And then this week.
Right. And then we had this week with our Halloween blast, if you want to call it that. Low temperatures. Coldest reading in the state, 2 degrees in west central Kansas on the 31st. All of the western divisions were in the single digits, from 6 degrees up in northwest Kansas to 4 degrees in southwest Kansas. So again, very, very cold. Not much warmer in the central divisions, where the lows were 10 and 11 degrees. A little bit better in the eastern divisions, but still not particularly warm. Northeast Kansas had a low of 18 degrees. Northeast division had a low of 18 degrees. Southeast division got down to 13, and that's an area that's not used to having that cold of a temperature this early in the season. In fact, we'll still be counting up the numbers to see just how many records were broken with that blast of cold air that we saw.
Will you balance it out? Was it a colder than normal October then overall?
Overall, yes, it averaged about 5 degrees cooler than normal, coldest in the west, not surprisingly, and warmest in the east. And that goes hand in glove with the precipitation. The areas that were drier tended to have the bigger temperature swings and the colder readings. And that, of course, was the western divisions.
And speaking of dryness, that tended to intensify as we moved through the month, didn't it? Certainly in western Kansas.
Well, in western Kansas, the impacts intensified. They actually got some moisture at the end of the month, but not a whole lot. The southwest division averaged under an inch, 9/10 of an inch to be exact, and that's 59% of normal. The northwest division averaged only 0.34 of an inch, and that's 22% of normal. In contrast, the southeast and south central, which have been exceedingly wet all year long, continued to be above normal for that, complicating any attempt to get harvest completed in those areas. The southeast division averaged just over 4 inches for the month, and that's 112% of normal. The South Central averaged 2.75 inches, and that's just a shade over 100% of normal, 104%. So again, we're still seeing that very sharp gradient on precipitation.
Now, we've winter wheat in the ground, and producers anxious to see if that emergence is going to pick up. You've fresh soil temperature numbers that give us a hint at what's going on there.
Right. I just before coming over here, I went and pulled the soil temperatures from this morning, and this would have been just at sunrise this morning when the coldest temperatures are likely to occur. And we were seeing soil temperatures in the 30s across all of western Kansas. Coldest area was just to the west of Garden City, where they got down to 31. But again, fairly nice temperatures for 7 o'clock in the morning after the cold that we saw. When we were having our strongest cold conditions on the 31st, temperatures dipped a little bit further in those western areas, and the area that had the coldest lows was not the area that had the coldest temperatures. And it wasn't in west central Kansas. It was in southwest Kansas, and the temperatures dropped down into the mid-20s, 26, 27 degrees. Difference is that we have the driest soils in that southwestern corner, and that, just like air temperatures, when you have less moisture in that, it's a lot easier to shift the temperatures one way or the other. So, again, most likely to have problems in the areas where you've got the driest points in your field. And indeed, Romulo has put together an article that'll be in today's e-update that details some of the impacts this cold might have on that winter wheat.
And in fact, we'll be visiting with K-State's Romulo Lolato about that information on next Tuesday's broadcast right here. Well, for this first week of November, as we roll ahead into the weekend and following, what's expected, Mary?
Well, we're going to have a little bit of a break in the cold air. We're going to have moderate temperatures. Probably not quite up to normal. We're looking at highs in the mid-50s, lows in the 30s, a little bit cooler than typical, but still much more comfortable than what we had to end October.
You bet.
But as we look out a little bit further and stretch into next weekend, we do have another round of moisture that is expected to come in, and that is likely to be followed by another round of cold air. So we may be on the roller coaster of some mild temperatures followed by some cold again.
And in fact, the outlook for the month of November is saying what to us then?
It's calling for, on the temperature side, equal chances for above or below normal on the temperatures. It's looking to be colder than normal to our east and warmer than normal to our west. And, of course, Kansas will be sandwiched in between those two patterns. On the moisture side, equal chances for above or below normal for the western two-thirds of the state. As you get into the eastern areas of the state, there is a slight tendency for drier than normal. Keep in mind with that, the eastern areas of the state tend to be wetter in November than the west. So the same amount of moisture spread evenly across the state would be wet in the west and dry in the east.
We'll see what comes forth this next week, and many thanks to you as always, Mary.
Thanks, Eric.
Mary Knapp, climatologist, K-State Research and Extension, along with us. And thanks to you, likewise, for tuning in. Please be back with us right here on Monday, won't you? Until then, Eric Atkinson bidding you a good weekend for Agriculture Today. This is the K-State Radio Network.